one of the things that Bitcoin does is it's basically a decentralized Excel spreadsheet, more or less. It's backed up by various forms of distributed consensus that allow that to function for so long. And governments have now grappled with this thing for 16 years. People said that they'd ban it, and again, some have. But now we have a president, for example, that in his first term was pretty opposed to it. Now he, endorses it. Maybe he's not fully philosophically aligned with Bitcoin proponents around the world, but he's kind of recognized the usefulness of it. I think there's pretty clear game theory here, where like people that were in kind of the Elizabeth Warren camp that were, kind of basing their identities or their brand around being anti-crypto or anti-Bitcoin. There's no money in that. Whereas there's more money in supporting the candidates that would, at least allow marginal freedom to keep interacting with it. In addition, and this is my last point for this kind of part.
The most recent surge in Bitcoin is creating a stir once more. It has risen above $119,000 after briefly falling below $115,000, rekindling the discussion about whether it would overcome the $123,000 resistance or see another decline. The larger issue is what distinguishes Bitcoin from all previous forms of money. While traders concentrate on the charts, Bitcoin's value is derived from rigorous scarcity, mathematical principles, and a system that is independent of political pledges, in contrast to currency, which can be issued indefinitely. According to Lyn Alden, Bitcoin is about safeguarding wealth in a system where incentives are in line with resilience and justice, not merely about everyday transactions. Bitcoin is still proving to be the most resilient currency we have ever seen, regardless of whether this rally continues to rise or cools. For further updates on Bitcoin and the wider world of digital assets, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications before we go any further. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
I would argue that shifting technology changes where the power lies, or maybe more specifically, how much power is concentrated, because there's certain asymmetries that form and then go away. So we can examine those claims kind of around the margins. One is that there are existence of smaller countries that get dollarized. So basically their currency is either one so mismanaged that basically people have no choice but to default to something else, and the government really kind of loses its ability to say stop using other monies, only use our monies, because it's so unworkable. Or in some cases there are politicians that come up and say, we've managed the currency so bad, we're just going to stick with basically the dollar, or whatever the case may be. And so around the margins there are already places that do that. And then there are even wealthy countries. I mean, there are certain parts of Switzerland that accept Bitcoin as tax, for example. You can pay your taxes with it, and otherwise it's endorsed. So around the margins, we know that while it is true that most governments will do their best to impose a currency, it's not unheard of for it not to be the case. In addition, we exist right now in like a 54-year period of global fiat currency. And so before then, there was some sort of tether to precious metals, mainly gold. And we don't know what the future is going to look like another 54 years from now. So this experiment that we currently exist in is still relatively new. And of course, every generation kind of reorients around the current reality. So now it's like, well, how could countries not entirely have their own currency? That's just how things are now. Almost every single country has one. And even countries that don't have one, the handful of them, use some other countries, larger countries, fiat currency. But again, that's we exist in this 150-year kind of speed mismatch, where the telecom era that totally reset the board, and then really only in the past third of that century and a half era, so really the past 50 years, have we entered the full-on kind of ramifications of that era, which is the fiat currency era that we currently have now. Even when a currency fails, people rarely fall back to gold, because gold is so slow and has all these divisibility issues, so they generally fall back, ironically, to a larger fiat currency that's still functioning. And another thing that's worth pointing out is, you can go on Twitter and find all these debates where they would say, if Bitcoin gets big enough, the governments are going to ban it. And of course, there have been some governments that either try to ban it or restrict it or surveil it. Is still very popular, to even ones that allowed it. And yet it's important to remember that government is not a monolith, at least in most cases, as long as you're not in North Korea or some other cases. Generally speaking, the places we're talking about, government is not a monolith. Every generation or so, that there's rotations that occur. There's some, while not everyone has the divisions of power that America has, many countries have some degree of divisions of power, either independent courts or multiple legislative bodies, and basically limits on any sort of centralized power. In addition, power is generally easier to wield when you get the public, at least mostly, on your side. It's kind of like plausible deniability. Whereas it's hard to do when you fully take the mask off and just say we're against the people now. It's often, for example, power is often taken in moments of fear, where you promise people security in exchange for some of their freedom. Or you say, what we talked about earlier, we're solving a problem for you. Hey, sometimes you don't solve that problem perfectly, but we're only human, and we're just kind of grifting off the side of it while we do it. But people still generally believe that things are being operated better than if there was no one. Whereas if you just come to them and say, we're going to reduce your freedoms because we want to, or because it's in our interest, that's when you're more likely to get widespread protests and things like that. And so one of the things that Bitcoin does is it's basically a decentralized Excel spreadsheet, more or less. That's backed up by various forms of distributed consensus that allow that to function for so long. And governments have now grappled with this thing for 16 years. People said that they'd ban it. And again, some have. But now we have a president, for example, that in his first term was pretty opposed to it. Now he, endorses it. Maybe he's not fully philosophically aligned with Bitcoin proponents around the world, but he's kind of recognized the usefulness of it. I think there's pretty clear game theory here, where like people that were in kind of the Elizabeth Warren camp that were, kind of basing their identities or their brand around being anti-crypto or anti-Bitcoin. There's no money in that. Whereas there's more money in supporting the candidates that would, at least allow marginal freedom to keep interacting with it. In addition, and this is my last point for this kind of part, when we back up, there's like this global chessboard where even when politicians in a country are trying to pose things locally, they're still competing with other regions.
The balance of power is shifting due to technology, which can even make it harder for governments to oversee the economy. People frequently turn to digital assets like Bitcoin or stronger foreign currencies in nations with unpredictable exchange rates. Bitcoin is already accepted for tax payments, even in affluent areas like parts of Switzerland. In the majority of the world, fiat money has supplanted gold for nearly 50 years. Additionally, people rarely return to gold when local currencies depreciate. Instead, they go for more useful options, such as foreign currencies, which are simpler to utilize. Although governments may attempt to control Bitcoin, their authority is limited. Demand from the general public is crucial, and when one nation cracks down on cryptocurrency, others frequently embrace it to draw in investment and creativity. To remain up to date on the most recent developments in Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and the digital economy, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications.
I would say that Bitcoin didn't change its narrative. I mean, from the beginning, there were people pointing out its store of value properties and its medium of exchange properties. It's been used as both from the beginning, and I actually had a recent article on this, which is to say that, people often, they separate, again, this is time dependent. So they'll say, because in its first 16 years of existence, really bootstrapping from zero up to now a $2+ trillion asset, to say it's not money because it's not ubiquitous exchange. Well, in the global sense, in order for it to be ubiquitous exchange, it'd have to be like 10 times bigger than it is now. It's a $2 trillion asset. And one of the points I made in our Twitter thread, was it's already better portable liquid capital than, I would say 170 out of the 180 fiat currencies out there, right? So the Egyptian pound is worse money in New Jersey, I would say, than Bitcoin is, meaning that it's harder for me to spend Egyptian pounds than Bitcoin. And that's not just because Egypt is a developing country, because it's similarly hard for me to spend Norwegian currency in New Jersey. It happens to be a small, wealthy country, no network effect that extends here. And so when you think of assets you could bring globally that have monetary aspects, Bitcoin is very high in the list. Physical dollars are high in the list. Gold coins or silver coins are high in the list. Bitcoin's high in the list. A couple other currencies like euros or pounds are reasonably high in the list. And it drops off really quickly after that. There are certain assets like a Monet painting or even Apple stock that have virtually no utility as money, either because they lack divisibility and liquidity in a painting's case, or as Apple stock, it's very hard to actually give it to someone else until ironically it's tokenized in the more recent time period. But before tokenization, there's no way to transfer Apple stock to someone else, and even then, it'd have all sorts of frictions, and it would rely on a chain of credit. And now we exist in a time where there's a spectrum of how much monetary aspect something has. So something that's like a painting has basically zero monetary value other than this a liquid store of value that can be self-custodied. Company stock is also not very monetized. Real estate's not very monetized in the sense that there's very little capability to actually use that to exchange value. But when you go toward things like silver coins, gold coins, or Bitcoin, then it starts having pretty significant monetary properties. And even though there's no country where there's enough density, like a top-down monopoly, so far, at least in the first 16 years, it still ranks pretty high globally for places you could use it. And I mean, I'm not sure if I assume Mark has bought and sold things in Bitcoin. I have. There's multiple countries where I've bought things using Bitcoin, and then in addition, to avoid the irony, I sell broken money in Bitcoin. At least as one of my distributor options, to avoid the joke that you only sell broken money for broken money. And so we've had significant sales globally of my book in Bitcoin. There's not been really any requests for people to buy it in gold or silver, and there's really obviously it's hard to do that online. There are some credit ways to do it, but there was demand and requests for people that want to buy it in Bitcoin. So we met that, and then when I received that Bitcoin, I hold it. It's not something I immediately sell for something else. I hold it. And so we can debate philosophically what is money, but the few things that I've used in my life for money are, one, fiat currencies, because I'm born in this era, and two, Bitcoin.
Lyn Alden concludes by reminding us that technology changes the balance of power in society in addition to making our lives better. According to her, one of the most obvious instances of this change is money. Governments dominated the money supply for the majority of history, but technology has gradually undermined that monopoly. People frequently give up on currencies entirely in weaker economies when governments mismanage them, switching to the US dollar or even Bitcoin. Bitcoin is already being used to pay taxes in many parts of the world, including wealthy nations like Switzerland. She also notes that only about 50 years have passed since the world experimented with using purely fiat money that isn't backed by gold or any other tangible object. Prior to that, money was backed by precious metals like gold for centuries. Since a whole generation has grown up with fiat, it seems normal now, but history shows us that this isn't always the case, and that there's no assurance it will continue indefinitely. Gold is slow and difficult to use, therefore people don't turn to it when weak currencies fall. Ultimately, Bitcoin succeeds in this international rivalry. It has the advantages of being decentralized, transnational, and challenging to shut down. Governments may attempt to limit it, but doing so runs the risk of displacing people and money that no country desires. Because of this, Lyn Alden thinks Bitcoin has already established itself globally and will only get bigger as nations vie for resources and technological advancements. For her, Bitcoin is about how technology is changing money, power, and society in general, not simply about price or speculation. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications for future Bitcoin, macroeconomic, and digital asset content. And as always, happy investing.